Nice to meet you. Welcome. Well, that's what, isn't that how it starts? Isn't that part of it? You want to get started?
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So we're going to start. I just want to let people know we have about 150 people registered today, but half are on Zoom. So we do look sparse here, but please know that there's another half on Zoom. And if people can move up as much as you feel comfortable, that would be great, just so we're not so spread out since we are in a big space. Anyway, I am Rebecca Drill. I'm president of the Needham Diversity Initiative, known as NDI. And before we delve into our more serious work this afternoon, I just want to take a moment to celebrate the fact that this is the 11th annual Needham Diversity Summit, which is an achievement in and of itself. And thank you. And this is also the first time ever that we're doing this event hybrid. So the last 3 years we were on Zoom, last 2 years. We were on Zoom. This is hybrid. We are not technicians, so I know we're going to have some hiccups today, so I just want to ask everyone to be very patient with us, especially all of you on Zoom, because we have never done a hybrid event before. So anyway, thank you for being in community here together, whether on Zoom or in person. And thank you for taking care of one another by wearing a mask. And I'm going to turn this over to Rebecca for now.
Yes, hello, my name is Rebecca Young, and I am a Needham Diversity Board member as well. And I have been part of the small but mighty planning committee for today's Diversity Summit. We're happy to be here with you today and to welcome you. Building Our Future Together, Act for Justice. What a wonderful opportunity to come together to push beyond and forward this critical work of diversity, equity, and inclusion here in Needham and beyond. We chose this theme for the summit as a call for action. We are thrilled with the work that we have done this past year with our Voices in Unity, after our Voices in Unity Summit, and we have worked together with many social justice groups in town to further the work of equity and inclusion, and today we are going to focus on a vision for our future. I'm also noticing that my glasses are steaming up, so bear with me.
So we're excited to have a stimulating and inspirational program this afternoon with Professor Chad Williams as our keynote speaker. He played an important role in our town's COPS and community discussions led by NUARI, which is a town group called Needham United Against Racism Initiative. We also welcome our student leaders, who will be our guest panelists, facilitated by our high school board members, Ray Winnig and Jesse Young-Paulson, as they share with us their vision for our future. We look forward to our breakout sessions, which will be run by various community members and organizations. And we will now take a moment to hear from Alyssa Arano, who will share NDI's land acknowledgement.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. We have the equity boxes here, if you've ever seen that visual. I'm here by myself, right? So I'm going to just ignore those. Hi, my name's Alyssa Arano. I'm also an NDI board member and participant in the planning committee for this event. So welcome to you all. November is Indigenous Peoples History Month, and that makes it a particularly fitting time to reflect on the first inhabitants of this geographic area that we now call Needham. And I'm going to read a land acknowledgement regarding that. We respectfully acknowledge that this event is taking place on the ancestral lands of the Massachusetts tribe and Natick Praying Indians, land that has also been the home of the Nipmuc and Pawtucket tribes, the Wampanoag Nation, and other indigenous peoples, some of whom we share the land with today. This land acknowledgement reflects the process of learning the history of local tribes and the sustained impact of the mistreatment of Native peoples. We acknowledge and must reckon with our role in the genocide of Indigenous people and the taking of their land. We aim to heal the harm that we perpetuate by occupying this land without honoring Native people and the land itself. We commit to repairing this harm. We begin by listening to Indigenous peoples and supporting the work to restore Native cultures, traditions, and land. We invite you to join us on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa.
And now we would like to say a special thanks to our co-sponsors, the Needham Human Rights Committee, Equal Justice Needham for Families, the Needham Free Public Library, the League of Women Voters, Needham Public Schools, and First Parish in Needham, and Needham Metco. NDI is a nonprofit, volunteer-run grassroots organization consisting of people who live and work in Needham. Our mission is to create an equitable and welcoming town by exploring, fostering, and strengthening and celebrating Needham's diversity of race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, ability, and age. NDI organizes events throughout the year to advance this mission. If you should feel so moved, please feel free to make a charitable donation. You can donate online at needhamdiversity.org or a cash donation in the donation basket on your way out. We also want to briefly share a teaser about the upcoming program events. On January 16th, we will host our annual observance and celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. On June 11th, we will have our Race Amity Day. So we look forward to seeing you at those events, and we will be hosting a book club as well, and we will be sharing that information, which is TBD, to be announced.
So before we begin, as we do each year, we'll share our norms or expectations for this afternoon, in which everyone will feel welcomed, included, celebrated, and respected. To help achieve this, we ask that we all respect and adhere to clear norms that we hope will foster constructive conversations and a safe place for everyone to express themselves. And on that note, by the way, this segment will be recorded, as will the student panel. But the breakout sessions will not be recorded, so people can feel free to say, whatever they want without worrying who might listen to it later. So the norms: practice active and intentional listening, be open to changing your perspective, participate with empathy. And 2 tech reminders: we will be Zooming our program live to participants. I just said this part about recording, okay. And please note that the one breakout session, Facing History in Our Town, will be the only Zoom breakout session, only for those on Zoom. We couldn't do the breakout sessions hybrid.
So we wanted to take a moment. We actually, as we look around, we do have about 60 people here with us today, which is a wonderful turnout. And online we have a host of many other folks. So we would love for you to turn and talk to a neighbor, perhaps move your seat, take a moment to introduce yourself, to share why you are here today, and perhaps one thing that that person may not know about you. We'd love to give you 3 to 4 minutes. So to share each for about 2 minutes, a little bit about yourself and why you're here today.
Use the Zoom chat to do that.
Oh, yes, people on Zoom, you can use the Zoom chat to do that. People on Zoom, you can use the Zoom chat to meet each other. Oh, okay.
So it's a little bit clicky, so we had to turn off the sound for everybody to see. So momentary.
So I'm saying, yes.
Yep, and I'm not going to come up with you then.
You want to, well, you want to come up, whatever. You can come up now. Denise is in the corner. Wait, Rebecca. Let's wrap up in about 1 minute. Okay, we're going to continue now. Sorry to cut off the chat. Okay. I guess it's a good sign that people are still talking, but I'm going to cut off the chat just to keep us on time here. In a moment, we're going to hear from our Representative Denise Garlick and our Senator Becca Rausch. But first, we just want to take a moment to thank all of our community leaders and legislatures for their activism and engagement all year long. If there are any other elected officials in the audience, for example, members of the select board or the school committee or anybody else that we're not thinking of, can you just please stand so we can acknowledge your contributions and give you a round of applause? We saw a few people walk in. Thank you. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Denise and Becca.
So good afternoon to all of you. It's incredible this is our 11th year. Such good work for so long. So like all who are gathered in person or virtual, I'd like to express appreciation for the organizers of today's events. We are grateful for their steadfast commitment, and each year the need seems to grow more urgent. I also ask that as we address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we keep our lens broad to also include all individuals with disabilities. Today we gather in hope for a better tomorrow. We acknowledge that we must do hard work, uncomfortable work in ourselves, as we also work then in our unsettled community, our strained commonwealth, and our struggling country. Let's address our issues with honesty. Let us speak in truth, and let us never, ever, ever give up hope that our work will indeed lead to our better selves and to a better tomorrow for all. I wanted to briefly share a poem with you by a poet named Yevtushenko. It's a tough poem, so hang in there with me. Lying to the young is wrong. Proving to them that lies are true is wrong. Telling them that God's in his heaven and all's well with the world is wrong. They know what you mean. They are people too. Tell them that difficulties can't be counted, and let them see not only what will be, but see with clarity these present times. Say obstacles exist, they must encounter. Sorrow comes, and hardship happens. The hell with it. Who never knew the price of happiness will not be happy. Forgive no error you recognize. It will repeat itself 100-fold, and afterwards our pupils will not forgive in us what we forgave. Good work today.
Good afternoon. I am State Senator Rebecca Rausch, and it is a distinct pleasure and privilege, to be here with all of you today. I want to echo the comments of my friend and colleague Denise Garlick, our state representative, in offering gratitude to everyone who has organized today's event and organized these events for now 11 years, which is an incredible accomplishment for our community. So again, deep thanks to the Needham Diversity Initiative, to everyone who participated in preparing today's events, and to all of you for gathering here, both physically in the room and online. Change making is no easy feat. It takes time and energy, sweat and tears, grit and persistence. And sometimes we get kicked down before we pick ourselves back up and stay in this critical work. We know that so very much is on the line right now. Reproductive rights, racial justice, safety for LGBTQ youth, economic inequities and inequalities, rising xenophobia and anti-Semitism. The list goes on and on and on. And so I really appreciate this year's theme for this summit, because building our future together requires intentionality. It requires collaboration and vision. We cannot act for justice and equity without figuring out what justice and equity actually look like and feel like. So I hope as you go through today's many conversations, we all also take time to reflect. It's easier to rattle off the sources of oppression and injustice than it is to do that self-reflection. Not only on our past actions as individuals, as part of a community, as part of a strong community, but also forward-thinking. How can each of us as individuals, as students, as teachers, as parents, as elected officials, in whatever role or hat you happen to wear, how can we be better? How can we do better? How can we make our community, our Commonwealth, our country, our world better? We're navigating a new world, one that none of us could have ever imagined. And we are navigating it together. As we rise to action in our community with each other, collaboratively, together, let's not forget why we show up to do this work. For a better community, for a better opportunity, for our children, for our grandchildren, and for generations we will never meet. With intentionality and reflection, each of us can be a visionary. Let's build that future together and act for justice and equity in all of the things that we do, today, tomorrow, Tuesday, and beyond. So we get closer to what we think of as a better world or as an ideal world. Because changing it may be no small feat, but together we can effectuate that change right here in our own backyard. Thank you. Thank you so much. I wish you a wonderful summit.
I am Ramin Abrishamian. I'm also a board member of Needham Diversity Initiative. It's with great pleasure that I will be welcoming and introducing to you our keynote speaker. Chad Williams is a Needham resident and has already, as has already been mentioned, played a key role in the series of community conversations that we had organized with the town of Needham called Cops and Community. Professor Williams is a Samuel J. and Augusta Spector, Professor of History and African American Studies at Brandeis University. He's also the chair of the Department of African and African American Studies. He specializes in modern American history with special emphasis on African American military and intellectual history, as well as the World War I era. He has authored a number of books and co-authored, including Torchbearers of Democracy, African American Soldiers in the World War I era, and who was a co-editor of Charleston Syllabus, Reading on Race, Racism, and Racial Violence, and also Major Problems in African American History, the second edition. Chad has published articles and book reviews in numerous leading academic journals and collections, as well as op-eds and essays in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Time, and The Conversation. He has earned fellowships from Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, the American Council of Learned Societies, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the Ford Foundation, and the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. His next book, The Wounded World, W.E.B. Du Bois and the First World War, will be published in April by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. Chad, welcome to Needham Diversity Summit, and thank you for being here with us.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. You can do a little bit better than that. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. Thank you, Ramin, for that very kind introduction. It is a great privilege and honor to speak at this important event. I would like to thank the Needham Diversity Initiative for a very kind invitation to speak today. I want to thank everyone who was involved in this event for their hard work on pulling everything together, especially the last minute tech stuff. You could have seen the scene here a few minutes before things started, but they got it together. So kudos to everybody getting all the, that deserves some snaps. So thank you for all of your hard work today, but over the past several years in working to make Needham a better place. I want to thank Representative Garlick, Senator Rauch, Needham Select Board members who are here today for joining us. And I want to thank all of you, everyone who is in the audience here as well as on Zoom, for being here today. We all have busy lives. You could certainly be somewhere else, especially on such an unseasonably warm fall day. But you made the choice to be here and devote a slice of your time to the work of community building. While it may seem and feel small in the broader picture of our troubled world and society, especially considering what's at stake on Tuesday, Election Day, these type of commitments and sacrifices matter. They especially matter for Needham residents like myself. I've lived in Needham for 10 years now, and I could say with complete honesty that I have enjoyed my decade in Needham. Easily, the majority of the people who I've interacted with during this time have been extremely nice. It has been a wonderful place for my wife and I to raise our 3 beautiful children, one of whom is sitting in the front row. I'm not going to embarrass them, at least not too much. We've had the privilege of them receiving an excellent education in the Needham Public Schools. In 2019, we fulfilled our dream of purchasing a house located on an idyllic cul-de-sac within walking distance to Sunita Williams, where my daughter is now in the 1st grade. We have incredibly kind neighbors who welcomed us with cards and cookies. The town, in so many ways, has really everything we need: public safety, good grocery stores, parks and playgrounds, reliable auto mechanics. I'm gonna give a shout out to Joey at Needham Shell for repeatedly coming to the rescue of my car. Great restaurants, including, in my opinion, one of the best cafes and bakeries in the Boston area, French Press. Shout out to Jay. Absolutely, absolutely. But I would be lying if I said I felt fully comfortable in Needham. I'm originally from San Francisco and was raised in an environment where racial, ethnic, religious, cultural diversity was an everyday facet of life. I went to the local Jewish Community Center for my after-school programs. I attended college in Los Angeles. During the majority of my graduate studies at Princeton University, I lived in Philadelphia and New York City. For my childhood and formative years, and for a good portion of my adult life, I was accustomed to seeing and being around people who looked like me, who shared similar cultural tastes. I was accustomed to not feeling like a minority. Mind you, I've always been quite good at adapting to my surroundings, whether at Princeton or in upstate New York, where I lived prior to moving to Needham. However, suburban Needham, for me, with its lack of racial diversity, has been and remains particularly confounding. Being black in this town is a strange and even disorienting experience. There are very few of us, as we can see by the room here today. I can easily go an entire day without seeing another black face. Whether it's picking up my daughter from school, shopping at Roach Brothers, standing in line on Saturday morning at Cafe Fresh Bagel, attending the town 4th of July fireworks while everyone around me sings and dances to Sweet Caroline, I remain acutely aware of my blackness, my simultaneous invisibility, and hypervisibility. But I also think the source of some of my discomfort, at least from my vantage point, is the comfortability of the vast majority of my fellow Needham residents. Whiteness is a fact of life in Needham. It is the social default. As has been proven throughout its history, whiteness functions in multiple ways, ranging from the subtle to the spectacular. But at the root of whiteness is the privilege of comfort. It is the comfort of being the majority. It is the comfort of knowing that you wield power. It is the comfort of feeling safe. It is the comfort of remaining silent. It is the comfort of the status quo. It is the comfort of ignorance. It is the comfort of tranquility. It is the comfort of time. I'm reminded of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words in his 1963 letter from Birmingham jail when he wrote, quote, "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Now, this, of course, is a Martin Luther King Jr. we might not be accustomed to hearing. We prefer a more sanitized king, a safe king, a comfortable king, over the radical king who criticized capitalism, militarism, and saw racism and white supremacy as embedded in the DNA of America. Needham, a town full of goodwill, is comfortable. But as King reminds us, comfortability and justice, true justice, cannot coexist. Comfort comes at the expense of justice. We're here today to build community and act for justice. Acting for justice means acknowledging how togetherness is impossible without the disruption of comfort. Now, let me be clear. This is not a problem unique to Needham. In the comfort of our suburban community, there's a tendency to believe that Needham is somehow different, that it's protected, that it is immune from the problems of the outside world. This, as we know, is not true. Needham is America. But let me put an even finer point on this. Needham is a product of American history, a history that has been defined by the privileging of white comfort and power over a commitment to justice for the racially oppressed. We may think that the past does not affect us, that the past is something we can easily move beyond and put behind us, that there is no need to reckon with the past. This type of thinking not only fuels a false sense of comfort, but comes at the expense of an understanding of one's very own identity, how we are all infused with history, and how history shapes who we are. Now, I could point to numerous moments, examples in American history when the comfort of white supremacy has resulted in the denial of justice for indigenous peoples, Asian Americans, Latinx groups, and other racially marginalized communities. I want to acknowledge that there are members of our community whose everyday experiences here are shaped by their own histories of trauma and persecution, as well as survival and resistance. I'm a historian and scholar of African and African American studies. As such, I am particularly attuned to the ways in which justice has been repeatedly and systematically denied to Black people throughout this country's history. I approach the study and teaching of African American history not just as a job or academic exercise, but as an ethical commitment and as a moral calling. In order to truly understand the durability of racism in our society and why American democracy today teeters on the abyss, we must take history seriously and sit in its discomfort, especially as it relates to the experiences of peoples of African descent. We tend to think about justice in the abstract. All too often, the term is used loosely and becomes devoid of meaning. This is why history matters. So let's look, for example, at, in my opinion, one of the most consequential moments in American history, Reconstruction, the period lasting just over a decade following the end of the Civil War. For much of the 20th century, as characterized by white historians and depicted in popular culture, such as films like the 1915 blockbuster, The Birth of a Nation, Reconstruction was seen as a tragedy, a vindictive attempt on the part of the federal government to force a poor, defeated, defenseless South to accept Black people unprepared for the responsibilities of freedom as equal human beings. But as W.B. Du Bois, the great scholar, activist, arguably the preeminent Black intellectual in American history, wrote in his groundbreaking 1935 book, Black Reconstruction, quote, "The unending tragedy of Reconstruction is the utter inability of the American mind to grasp its real significance, its national and worldwide implications." The American Civil War, resulting in an estimated 620,000 deaths, was fought over the fate of slavery in America. Black people, including some 3.5 million slaves, ensured through fighting in the Union Army, fleeing Southern plantations, ensured that the war would also be about their freedom and their place in the United States as full citizens. America and its future stood at a crossroads and faced a monumental question. Would it become a multiracial democracy and take the necessary steps to give justice to Black people after more than 2 centuries of slavery and racial oppression? In attempting to grant justice to African Americans, Reconstruction achieved a number of remarkable results. There were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, ending slavery, granting formal citizenship to Black people, and giving them the right to vote. There was the first Federal Civil Rights Act, passed in 1875, that guaranteed all citizens, regardless of color, equal access to public spaces and accommodations. There was the opportunity for Black men to hold elected office. The United States had its first Black congressman in both the House and the Senate, and its first Black governor. There was the establishment of schools, including the first historically Black colleges and universities, as free people exhibited an insatiable desire to learn. There was property ownership, as Black people, perhaps more than anything else, viewed the acquisition of land as key to true freedom and justice. But when justice disrupts comfort, there is inevitable backlash. And in the case of Reconstruction, the backlash was immediate. After the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, who was killed because of his proposed Reconstruction plans and belief that Black men deserved the right to vote, the new president, Andrew Johnson, really one of the worst presidents in American history. He was awful, right? You agree with me? Thank you. There's a good Needham student right there. Andrew Johnson immediately revoked the wartime orders granting granting land to free people, committed to restoring plantations in the South to their white owners, and granted amnesty to treasonous Confederate leaders. Southern states enacted a series of laws known as the Black Codes, which restricted the freedom of movement of Black people, limited opportunities to own property, curtailed their right to bear arms, and made even the most minor infractions, such as loitering on the street or not having a job, a crime punishable by servitude and forced labor. One by one, Republican-held Southern legislatures were, quote, redeemed by Democrats and former slaveholders determined to recreate the antebellum status quo as much as possible. Men who had just a decade earlier attempted to destroy the Union and fought for a nation with white supremacy as its bedrock principle returned to Congress, including Alexander Stephens, the former vice president of the Confederacy. Racial violence became widespread, as the years immediately following the Civil War marked the birth of white terrorist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. Despite the efforts of federal government to suppress the KKK, Black people had little protection from night riders and bloodthirsty mobs, as seen in the Colfax, Louisiana massacre of 1873. By the presidential election of 1876, once sympathetic white Northern allies, many of whom were former abolitionists, people of goodwill, openly asked if justice for Black people was still worth fighting for. So when the results of the election were contested in several Southern states, the government made the choice to end Reconstruction by removing all remaining federal troops from the South. White Americans, North and South, opted for the comfort of reconciliation and the continued social, political, and economic subordination of Black people over justice. As W.B. Du Bois wrote, again in Black Reconstruction, quote, "The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. The whole weight of America was thrown to color caste. And what did colored caste look like? Restricted from land owning, most black families, many living on the same plantations they had once toiled as slaves, became reliant on sharecropping, were exploited by white landowners and credit merchants, and became trapped in a crippling cycle of debt. Taking advantage of the 13th Amendment, allowance of involuntary servitude when convicted of a crime, the South effectively criminalized blackness and laid the groundwork for our current day system of mass incarceration. Beginning in the 1890s, Southern states began adopting a host of tactics: poll taxes, grandfather clauses, literacy tests, designed to strip African Americans of the right to vote. Jim Crow segregation became legalized with the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court decision. From railroad cars to schools to restrooms to water fountains, separate and unequal racial distinctions became an everyday part of Southern public life and seeped into all aspects of American culture. Racial violence became endemic and increasingly spectacular. From the 1890s to the early 1900s, white mobs lynched an average of 3 African Americans per day. Justice is not abstract. The cost of choosing comfort over justice are not abstract. We are still living with the legacies of Reconstruction's premature demise, the racial wealth gap, modern forms of voter disenfranchisement, anti-blackness in policing, in the judicial system, racialized educational inequalities, and housing disparities. I could go on and on and on. Indeed, as Du Bois wrote, quote, "If the reconstruction of the Southern states from slavery to free labor and from aristocracy to industrial democracy had been conceived as a major national program of America whose accomplishment at any price was well worth the effort, we should be living today in a different world." Some would prefer to shy away from these harsh realities and claim innocence. That is not my history. Those were not my ancestors. All of that may be true, but it doesn't really affect me. That is both denial as well as a type of self-protection. By denying the facts of history, you are in reality denying who you are and protecting yourself from the inevitably uncomfortable internal reckoning that the acceptance of history demands. But what we must also understand is that this type of innocence and the comfort that comes with it is also a type of violence. It is certainly harmful to those without the luxury of passivity and silence, who lack the power and voice to be heard, to be seen, who must exist in the world fully cognizant of their marginality and vulnerability, who every day are forced to make decisions that could quite literally mean life or death. Yes, violence towards them. But the comfort of innocence is also a type of self-inflicted violence. Those who are content with innocence, who choose comfort over justice, are also harming themselves. In my introduction to African and Afro-American Studies course that I'm teaching this semester, last week I had students read James Baldwin's 1953 essay, Stranger in the Village. In this essay, Baldwin reflects on his experience living in a remote village in Switzerland and the strange meaning of being black and being American in a foreign country. Baldwin uses the essay to contradict his exoticness in the village with the familiarity of his presence in the United States, how his blackness is a staple of the white American mind. And yet, he still remains a stranger in the United States, unknown, as white people, by virtue of their power and racial privilege, ignore the realities of history and the realities of racial oppression. The time had come, Baldwin wrote, for them to understand the inevitable costs of their innocence. People who shut their eyes to reality simply invite their own destruction, Baldwin writes. and anyone who insists on remaining in a state of innocence long after that innocence is dead turns himself into a monster. On June 7th, 2020, and maybe some of you were there, myself and two of my children stood along Highland Avenue with hundreds of other Needham residents to express our outrage at the continued killing of Black people at the hands of the police and white vigilantes, and to commit to the work of racial justice. It was an inspiring moment, part of, we hoped, what would be a deeper and broader racial reckoning with this country's past, its present, and its future. I don't question the goodwill of the majority of the people on Highland Avenue that day, but I do wonder where they are now. Where are they? What have they done over the past 2+ years? How are their lives different? What, if anything, have they sacrificed? Justice requires discomfort. It does not require empathy or pity. It does not require selective reading. It does not require performative acts of kindness. It requires discomfort. Needham, as we think about our community, as we interrogate our community, as we commit to our community, let us embrace the discomfort that comes along with it. Let us reflect on our own comfortability and how we can be better. And that goes for myself as well. Let us find ways to come together in discomfort with the understanding that this is the only way for us as a community and as a nation to achieve true justice. It can be done. It must be done because the stakes are too high. Thank you very much. Now, do we have time for Q&A?
I want to see if there were any questions or comments from the audience.
Absolutely, absolutely.
2 minutes.
Just 2 minutes. Ooh. I'm sticking around, so feel free to talk to me at any point. But all right, great. Should I call on folks or? Yeah. Sure. Right. Yes, sir.
If you were to recommend 2 steps that town leadership could do in this town that we're not currently doing,
Can I get back to you on that? Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to just kind of rattle something off the top of my head. There's people who are doing the work here in town, who are putting serious, sustained thought into those type of questions. I think it's important for us to trust them, to support them, to find ways to build strength, to build power, for lack of a better word, so that the ideas that they have can be put forward and actually be implemented. So I'm kind of dodging your question. Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
At an individual level, what is it that we can do? I mean, you're saying people of goodwill, and what can we do, on a day-to-day basis to change this world,
Mm-hmm.
to change the attitudes, to change our own attitudes? What is it?
Sure.
In your view,
Yeah, I'm.
Can you repeat the question for our audience online?
Sure. So the question is, what can we do as individuals on an everyday level? What can we do? I'm not the type of person to kind of offer a roadmap or a checklist of things that people should do on a daily basis to, okay, if I do this today, the world is going to be a better place. I mean, I think what we have to recognize is that we all have particular callings in life and in this world. To be aware of what those are and to really lean into them, right? To recognize where our strengths lie, recognize the contributions that we can make. We can't do it all, right? You know, we're not magicians, at least I'm not. So I think we need to recognize our strengths, recognize our limitations as well, but also recognize that change doesn't happen overnight, and that growth is a constant process of learning. And that learning, that growth, can take place on a daily level, right? Whether it's small acts, such as picking up a book, reading, or larger acts, attending a protest, or what have you. You know, everyone needs to, I think, be introspective, think critically about where they can fit in and what they can contribute. Let's see. Over here? Okay, yes. Sure, did you have your hand up?
I'll just introduce myself. My name is Marguerite. I'm from Wellesley, but I'm thrilled to be here for your invitation. So thank you. I'm raising 4 Black kids, and conversation around the table for the last 10 years have changed. So the 28-year-old comes home and says, "Oh my gosh, what's going on at home?" Do you have the same experience over the last 10 years, your conversations around your dinner table?
Yeah, well, when I could actually get the kids all at the dinner table. Yeah, the past 10 years have been challenging. Certainly as parents, but I think just as engaged, concerned citizens. Being a parent gives you a much different perspective on life and your responsibilities. And having to make my children, one of whom is 17, a senior in Needham High School, wears his hair out like this, teaching him to be aware of his surroundings, teaching him to be aware of his decisions, the implications of his decisions. Those are difficult conversations to have. But it's important to not force those conversations, if that makes sense. That, again, those type of conversations need to happen organically and on a daily basis, all right, and be incorporated into our everyday lives and our everyday parenting practices. So I would like to think that my children, my sons, are cognizant enough, based on how we raise them on a daily basis, of the world around them and their place in it. But certainly, you know, the past 10 years, and that's a whole nother conversation of what has happened over the past 10 years, has been incredibly challenging on a number of different levels.
Thank you. Last question? Last comment, question?
Yes, my name is Rachel. Thank you so much for being here. What I heard from you today is that that I need to be engaged, not sometimes, but all the time. And as a white person, for me, sometimes it's like, what do I do? And I've also heard throughout these last 2 or 3 years is that it's not, well, I don't know if it's right or not, but what I've heard is that it's not the Black population to help us figure it out. And I struggled with that at the beginning, but I think I have a better understanding of that. And so I'm not really, I mean, I'd love to know, but that's, you know, that's, like you said, I have to be introspective and figure it out. And I do have a whole bunch of ideas. So my question, I have a lot, but what I'm going to ask is, your statement that said there are people in this community that are working on it. Are some of them here today?
Raise your hands, right? Yeah. We wouldn't be here today without them. Yeah.
What, actually, I'm gonna ask one more question, if you don't mind. How long have you worked at Brandeis in this capacity, or?
For 10 years, yes.
Oh, that's right, 10 years,
Yeah.
okay. And is this a new position at Brandeis, or was that department there already?
So the department that I am chair of, the Department of African Studies, is one of the oldest Black Studies departments in the country. It was established in the spring of 1969 when Black students demanded a department, not a program, a department of African American Studies that would speak to their educational needs, that would speak to who they are, not just as students, but as people. This was part of a larger nationwide movement for the creation of Black Studies departments. So I'm certainly part of a much longer legacy and tradition. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and again, I'm sticking around. Thank you.
If you can give us one moment as we lift things and prepare for our students to join our conversation.
Yeah, the gain's up really high. I'm gonna try to turn it down a little bit because if that thing's within 3 feet of your face, it'll be very loud. Just like, I don't know how any of this works. Just like ignore the fact that this one's here. Will do.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Apologies. And thank you all for joining us at the 11th Annual New Diversity Summit. My name is Jessie Ann Paulson, and I, alongside my co-moderator, sitting across from me, Ray Winnick, will be facilitating this panel of inspiring student leaders at Needham High. In thinking about our collective theme of building our future together, acting for justice, we were invited by Needham Diversity Initiative to spotlight students' visions and efforts towards the future. And so, without further ado, we will turn it over to our peers who will introduce themselves and the work that they do in the Needham Public Schools. If you don't mind, please introduce your name, pronouns, grade, and organizations you are involved with at Needham High.
I'm Elisa Aguilera. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in 10th grade, and I am in Latino Hispanic Student Union as well as Black Student Union.
My name is Jaewon Lee, and I'm currently a senior, and I use he, him pronoun. And in Needham High School, I lead Courageous and Conversation on Race, Honor Peace, Students Advocating for Equity, and Asian Student Union.
Here we go. Hi, my name is Sid. I use they, he pronouns, and I am a senior. I work for the Needham High School newspaper, The Hilltopper, and I am a player on the field hockey team.
My name is Fee Perez. I use she, they pronouns. I'm an 11th grader this year, so a junior. And I'm also involved with the Latino Hispanic Student Union and the Environmental Action Club.
Thank you so much, everyone, for introducing yourselves. So let's just get into our first question, and we can just pass this around as folks have thoughts. We're asking, as we think about our futures as our theme, we think of all the work that has been done, but also how far we have to go. What do you see personally as one of the most urgent matters to address in your community or communities, however you may define that? Anyone have a thought initially that they'd like to share? Or you can go around.
This is for speaking on behalf of Latino and Hispanic people, but I think it's so hard to define just one issue because there are so many issues that just stem from racism, but it sort of branches out into so many smaller issues that we have to focus and tackle. But I'd say ultimately it's just education, and this can fall into educating others, so educating white people, people that don't know Hispanic people about what it truly means and just overcoming those stereotypes, while as well the education reform within Latino students, as they are the highest dropout rate.
I think my answer may be a little bit broad, but I think one of the most urgent matters, because I don't necessarily want to say like the most or anything along those lines, but one of the most urgent matters to address at Needham High School is its treatment of disabled people. Although you most likely would not be able to tell by looking at me, I am someone with a physical disability. And I also have a cognitive disability, and the bulk of microaggressions and bullying, etc., that I have received from my peers and adults in Needham has been due to being a disabled person. And, you know, I see it almost every single day. People making really horrible comments, people being even occasionally physically aggressive towards individuals that have cognitive and physical disabilities in Needham. And I think one of the largest reasons for that is that there is a really significant lack of compassion in Needham for people who are different from the norm. And I think there has been some work done to counteract that, but at the same time, that work that is being done in a lot of ways is not enough.
I think the most urgent importance is having conversation, like frequent conversation on race and to be anti-racist in general. Where many find comfort in saying like, I'm not racist, I think there's like a really huge difference between being an anti-racist and not being a racist. So where we draw a line at not being a racist to a racist, by not being against of racism, I think you're in fact kind of allowing inequity to kind of persist. So I believe that I see the urgency of continuously talking about race to dismantle racism.
I think the most urgent matter is the way Needham High School treats tragedies in between towns surrounding Needham and then towns in Boston. You know, there was a tragedy that happened not too long ago with two Wellesley girls, and you know, we did have our moment of silence and it was very respectful. But then there was also, unfortunately, a shooting outside of the Burke, which is a high school in Boston, and it was not talked about. And since there are MECO students that, you know, students who live in Boston and go to school in Needham, it's kind of disappointing, because if they should be, that situation should have been brought out to the light to let those students, and as well as the students that do live in Needham, know that that has happened, and you know, we should be. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. So something that Sid brought up was this idea of compassion and the lack of compassion we have for people who have differences to us. And then also the idea of how Needham feels like we're isolated as a community from other people. I'm curious if any of you have any thoughts about where that inability to empathize with those around us begins from, and how we might go about amending that. Sid, do you want to start with that?
Sure.
Give it a shot.
Yeah, give it a go. I could write a whole essay on this, and I hope to one day, but I think that the root of this issue comes from an almost endless cycle of ignorance and of just a lack of empathy for others that comes, it starts with our parents, starts with our grandparents. And I have seen it countless times where I've met someone, it's usually a person that I play a sport with, who is just so borderline inhumanly cruel towards others who have disabilities, towards people who are people of color, towards queer people of all varieties. And I've wondered to myself, wow, I wonder why they're this way, and then I meet their parents and I realize, oh, that's why. And as horrible as that sounds, I think because Needham is so isolated, it becomes this breeding ground for cruelty, because you have so many families that have never left town and have become so comfortable in their ignorance and have become so comfortable in being comfortable, essentially, that they've never taught themselves, they've never taught their children what it means to be different and what it means to be the norm, and how being the norm and how not acknowledging that identity can be violence in and of itself.
I think one of the other point could be Needham High School does not regularly have like serious like topic. So one of the major events where we do have a serious topic is Speak Out Day, and apart from that, people tend to kind of put things aside and kind of neglect on things that need to be addressed for their own comfort. So I think that could be one of the way why there's lack of empathy around Needham High.
I think also it's kind of added on to Sid's idea is that Black kids, when they're young, they get taught that, they get taught that being Black in any community is not dangerous, but it's like you need to be aware of your skin tone. And being in anywhere in Needham, the elementary, the high school, there's no unit, there's no class, there's no nothing saying, well, you know, white students, Black students, you need to be aware of your privilege or the privilege that you don't have. And I think the most that you can get is the clubs, but not everyone is joining those clubs or being aware of those clubs. You know, you need something that every student will need to learn.
Thank you. So Chewan brought up this thing that we do at the high school called Speak Out Day, which is a venue for students being able to share their lived experiences, often oriented around mental health. Just as a refresher for people who might have heard of it before, and as an introduction to people who might not have heard of it, students will stand up and they will share with their community and with their peers vulnerable experiences they've had with some prescriptions for what they'd like to see change in their community. So just to give context to what he was talking about. So as our panelists have highlighted what seems to be most urgent, we hope that you might be able to share what the obstacles you're facing in the work that you're doing, and what can the broader community do to be co-conspirators with you all in overcoming these obstacles?
I think a lot of the obstacles we have faced have just been stereotypes or just pure ignorance that is often brushed off as humor, just because people have become so comfortable in their ignorance and what they don't know that they've just fully accepted that that's what they think is right. So I have been asked, probably, or maybe not as a joke, if I'm involved with cocaine, if I am related to Pablo Escobar, just because of my ethnicity. And there's so many conversations I've had to have with people where they just have assumed everything they were saying is completely okay, or they were just making just maybe a funny joke, maybe they were repeating something they've seen on TV, and it was just absurd to hear that someone could say stuff like that and just think it was okay. So a lot of it has been undoing what people have learned and trying to teach them new things in a way that is respectful, but also showing them that what they're doing is wrong.
I'd say similar to what a lot of my peers are saying on this topic, the largest obstacle to the work that we do is only not having a lot of spaces for marginalized students to talk about the difficulties that they face in Needham High School. I can't even count on one hand the amount of times that I've been not even just asked a stupid question, but that I've been, had a verbal attack thrown at me for being one way or another. I can relay a story about how I was sitting in a car with the mother of a friend of mine who she asked me a very personal question about my cognitive ability. She asked me point blank, she said, "Are you autistic?" And I said, "I am autistic. Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, you hide it very, very well." And I thought to myself, why do you think I hide it very well? And, Needham obviously has a very large problem with ableism, particularly targeted towards autistic people. And it's genuinely horrifying to watch as students who, are getting straight A's, who are going to these, amazing liberal arts colleges will, on one hand say that they support disabled people, but then in the exact same breath, they will make fun of someone for having an odd facial expression, or for speaking in a tone that they consider abnormal.
As a club leader and a bunch of other wellness equity leader, I think one of the largest obstacles I face is people kind of not wanting to have conversation about race. We are all aware that conversation on race is a very difficult and challenging subject, but I wish that people would be able to take a step out of their comfort zone to talk about race, which is very present in our lives.
So, V and Sid, something you both touched upon was the normalization and naturalization of degrading comments or jokes that never receive accountability because they seem so benign or because our community doesn't honor the negative impact that they have. What do you think a culture of accountability might look like for people who engage in those behaviors, and then a culture of healing for those who are victims of those perpetual jokes? Do either of you?
I can speak. I think this just always goes back to the fundament of education, and especially at Needham High School, we have a lot of activism, but a lot of it could also just be considered performative because we say a lot of speak, but there's no action on it. So while, yes, we do call ourselves a diverse school, we call ourselves a school that advocates for others, within the school, there's not much change. So Latino Heritage Month was just passed, and there was no class on it. There wasn't even a banner or anything everywhere. Maybe a teacher said it once at the end of an email, but ultimately it just passed like it was just another normal day, another normal month. And I think these quote-unquote jokes and these microaggressions could really only be combated once people are exposed to different cultures and are exposed to things that they don't necessarily know.
Thank you so much all for sharing. And so thinking about all of these things, we've had some of you here sharing sort of these really difficult experiences, these stories of how that there is a lot of obstacles and there's a lot of people who are specifically harming you in various ways that they don't even understand. And that the advocacy work you may be engaging in is incredibly demanding, and it's often disheartening, as you've been saying, is that you have all this work that you may do, and you may not be able to see a lot of change in your peers and in how they're treating you. And so we want to ask you, how do you personally make this work you're doing fulfilling, and how do you find time to celebrate your identities and communities, and thinking about how do we create healing for ourselves when so many of our peers may not be giving us that space or that respect?
One thing Asian Student Union in Needham is trying to shift away from is sort of victimizing Asian youth, and we're kind of moving towards empowering youth by celebrating our culture and diversity. So we are having a lot of cultural workshops or heritage exploration happening in Needham. So that is something that I am trying to make it happen, and something that we're trying to progress towards.
Latino Hispanic Student Union is new to this year, so we are trying to do many events and many things where we can educate others upon what's happening, and we also are trying to donate to charities about that support Latinos and Hispanics and what's going on in the world. So I feel like that is something we are trying to do to help.
And I'm gonna violate the norms of moderation as it's typically done, but both Ray and I sitting here represent the Queer Student Union at Needham High, which is another advocacy-based group. And one thing that we've thought about in thinking about how we make our work fulfilling and how we celebrate our identities and recover from the prejudice we face is we've really reconsidered what is the goal of a political union? Is it to be visible? Is it to do advocacy work? Is it to be reflective, to be introspective? Is it to heal? And what we found is that people who solicit our space
most often are seeking it as a refuge from the politicization that they face. Oftentimes, people are so exhausted from existing in a community where, to use the words of Professor Williams, they feel both invisible and hypervisible, where they feel like they're being seen as other while also not being seen in a meaningful way whatsoever. And so people seek our space, and I don't know if this is true for your unions as well, but people seek the space as a way to escape the really violent politicization where they're asked to be a spokesperson, where they're victimized, where they're targeted, where they're tokenized. And they just want to be with people who intrinsically understand each other in a way that's fundamental without the invasiveness of questions and probing and the politicization that is put onto queer bodies in our experience. Do any of you all resonate with that? Do any of you want to sit?
So I and many people in Asian Student Union see Asian Student Union as a place where we can combine our voices to create a unified voice so that you'll be heard and not be dismissed. So that is another part that speaks to.
I am going to have to agree a lot with Jesse, where, so although disabled people at Needham High School do not have a student union, I wanted to start one in my sophomore year, but unfortunately COVID got ahead of me, and the sophomore research project got in my way. But I think for myself and for a lot of other disabled people that I know, it's, you know, it's all about kind of personally switching the narrative, where I think, you know, on the topic of cognitive disabilities, you know, the narrative about autism and about autistic people, particularly young autistic kids, is the narrative is suffering. The narrative is no one understands me. The narrative is I don't feel human, which can be true, and a lot of times I don't feel human. But at the same time, there is a certain, I don't necessarily know how to describe it, a certain joy almost that comes with being autistic, and that, you know, I was in my environmental class the other day, and we got to put on our waders and go into the lake, and the joy that I felt from that was so completely healing in a way that I almost can't describe. And even though a lot of my classmates were like, "Why are you so excited to go look at frogs in mud?" Because frogs in mud are cool. And yeah.
Thank you all for sharing, and we really want to sort of highlight this importance of how do we both help others who may be, as we've sort of been talking about, the norm, who are seen everywhere. How do we sort of share what we want to see from them, and also how do we sort of offer a window into what we're doing for ourselves and how we're building our communities, and how we are building small communities within this broader community of Needham High School, of Massachusetts or the Boston area or America. And so sort of moving into thinking about our theme of building our future together, we really want to think about what do you think intergenerational movements would look like, and how can folks joining us today support the work that you do? And just as a quick aside to this, as you know, to take one from Jesse's book and also break the sort of norms of moderation, another thing that we have been doing as a community building exercise is attending intergenerational dinners at the Center at the Heights for elders in Needham, and speaking with a small group of queer elders who either live there or offer or receive services there. And we go as students and we just talk to them and we eat dinner. And I think this is one of the things that is a way that many people would not see that as part of the work, as we say it, as part of changing how our society works. And yet for us, it is such a wonderful place to be able to create this community for youth to see themselves in people who are so much older than them, and for these elders to sort of see how these people who are going to the same school some of them went to are making these changes, and to be able to communicate in that way and to have that community building. So to ask our panelists, have you been able to have experiences like that with intergenerational groups? And do you want to? And how do you want to see that in your life?
I didn't really get to, but one thing I do is I look up to my parents who are also immigrants, so I kind of in a way learn from how they deal with it, also learn from them how not to deal with certain things, And yeah, so that's kind of the way I kind of learn from people. Also, I look up to a lot of like other students of color leaders, like our past BSU leader Lauren was a really good mentor to me about how to deal with certain stuff. And yeah, and I hope my work I do can be also built upon so people can find, you know, their place in, you know, using the workshops and stuff we created.
And kind of as a subsequent question to that, what would you envision people here today might be able to do to be, like, to stand in solidarity with the work that you do?
I think since the work I do is kind of preaching for racial equity, I think people can support us by hearing us out, you know. And other thing could be when you go back home, be an anti-racist yourself in your own domain, doing what things you can do using your resources. I think that's one of the things that people can support us by doing.
I absolutely agree with Shaewon, and I agree with Jesse, where, you know, there's a lot of room for talking to, you know, your elders, talking to people that are younger than you as well. I think for myself, because, you know, disabilities, particularly physical disabilities, are very prevalent in our community, particularly with our elders. I think that although I haven't had the chance to at this moment, but I really want to get to know, you know, my elders, people from my community who are older and who have lived through years of oppression due to being physically or cognitively disabled. I personally suffer from something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I doubt anyone in this room knows what that is, but it is. You know what it is? Nice. Yeah, one in 5,000. And I think that it's EDS and disabilities like it that, you know, appear when you're young and then carry on into when you're an adult, make it very, very important for you as a young person to talk to your elders, and even for you as a young person to talk to elders who are not disabled and say, hey, you know, this is a very real thing. You need to talk to your kids about this, so that if they see someone who might look different than you, who might move different than you, that's okay. And then, you know, that's just a normal variation of what it means to be human.
This is going a little bit off topic, but it's about what the people in the crowd can do today. And I think I cannot stress how important voting is, because so many of the problems within minorities has become so politicized that their lives and their well-being is now being decided by people that do not represent them. Which is why it is so important to really scrutinize and analyze every single point that every single politician is making, because we cannot let people in power dictate the lives of minorities.
So I had a follow-up question for Sid. One thing that you touched upon at the beginning that was both really heart-wrenching and really profound is that sometimes the prejudice starts at home and sometimes it starts with parents. So for the people in the audience who are parents today, what do you want them to tell their kids that the people around you didn't tell their kids? And any of you can answer that question.
I think that there's a very big conversation to be had, because, you know, like I said, and like Jesse said, that prejudice starts at home. And when it starts at home, it kind of becomes rooted into the young mind like a parasite in a lot of ways, and it grows and it grows, and then it transfers to the people around them. And I think that that conversation needs to happen before that child ever meets a disabled student, physically or cognitively, because at the end of the day, you know, if you're a neurotypical abled person living in a family where everyone around you is neurotypical and is able-bodied, and you meet someone who is not either of those things, even without meaning to, that person might say something really terrible. That happened to me a lot when I was a very young kid. Some of my earliest memories or of people asking me, you know, why I didn't properly make facial expressions or why my arms bent a certain way. And I think that those conversations need to happen when a child is young, and I think it needs to happen along the lines of, hey, this is, you know how your friend has green eyes and blonde hair, or you know how your friend is Japanese and you're Irish. I think part of that conversation also needs to be, hey, you know, you have all of your joints working in a normal way, but some people don't, and that's okay. And you know how you can make all your facial expressions from the moment you're born. Some of your friends might not be able to, and that's okay. And I think, you know, we need to think, as adults, I think there needs to be less of these stories being told to your kids of, oh my God, you know, being disabled or having autism is this horrible thing. You know, you meet people like that, they're people to pity, or alternatively, they're people to bully and harass. I think that the narrative needs to be more like, hey, people are this way, and that's okay, that's normal. And there's nothing we can do to change them, and there's nothing we should do to change them.
I think there's just a lot of parents that still treat race as a really touchy subject, which it is, but they often wait until their children are old enough, or quote unquote old enough to have these conversations, which is similar to what Sid was saying. These conversations should be started as they're young. Like, yes, it's a sensitive topic, but your child needs to learn. You can't just hold off these issues and pretend they don't exist until they are faced with an issue. And until these parents have these conversations, as much as they like to think they're an activist, or as much as anyone likes to think that they're not and don't have anything internalized in any way, we all have internalized biases that a lot of people don't recognize, and that has such a tremendous impact on children and their opinions and their beliefs that I don't think a lot of parents realize.
So that just about concludes all of the planned questions we have. So I'm going to open it up to the panelists to share any last stuff they have, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience to ask a few questions. We can take a handful for our wonderful panelists. Do any of you have any last things you'd like to share, or can we jump into questions?
I have some questions from the online participants.
Okay.
So I wanted to offer them, if you could share it again so they can hear it's
Absolutely.
being asked. You mentioned a culture of accountability. Is there any structures in the school practice, like a community or restorative justice practice at the high school?
So to reiterate the question was, sorry?
The subtitles picked it up.
Okay. The subtitles looked at the question, but I'm going to repeat it for the audience's benefit, just in case they can hear her. So, the person who asked the question asked that we mentioned a culture of accountability, and they were curious if there were any structural institutions like restorative justice or transformative justice that existed to create these measures of accountability and to actually ensure that they happen and that people get justice. Do any of you feel like you can speak to that?
So one thing Needham High School is doing is that we launched a restorative circle where people sit around in a circle and have a chance to talk about things they want to talk about. So it's kind of a thing where you can use that power in a way to talk about things and people must listen. So I think that's one of the ways Needham High School is doing to create restorative justice. And another one could be reading a book about it, I heard, but yeah, that's only so far I know.
I'm happy to answer that question as well. I've been invited to sit in on 2 different instances of restorative justice practices being implemented at Needham High, both of which pertains to transphobia that happened in the school, one of which was an incident at the walkout that myself and my co-moderator Ray led, in which a group of boys behaved in a way that was sexually harassing towards the crowd, in tandem with also being incredibly homophobic and transphobic. And we were asked if we wanted to join the restorative justice circle, which neither of us chose to do, just out of not feeling like it was appropriate for us to sit down, because we had already put ourselves up there on a pedestal and said, like, we feel vulnerable in this political climate, and they didn't honor us then, and we didn't feel like they would necessarily honor us a second time, sitting across from them, unless they had to, due to administrative supervision. But I think that that does show a marked deviation from the like carceral practices we used to have where we said, okay, you did something wrong, leave school for 2 weeks, leave school for 2 days. You don't get to be here. And you can just come back after a bit, and you miss things, and there's no accountability for your victims, and you never have to admit what you did is wrong, you can just leave and then come back. So I do think there is a shift in culture. And sort of to add on to that a bit, I think really what we're seeing is that there's a lot of understanding now that it's not most effective to say, like, we should just suspend this student because that's not how they're going to learn, and that's not how the people that they may have harmed are going to be able to heal from that. And it's not how we're going to have a community that doesn't have these instances, that doesn't have this bias and this hate and this violence. And so what we are seeing though is that we have this understanding that we need something more restorative, we need something more community-based. But the problem, I think, is that a lot of what we're seeing is that when it comes to administration, there is still that sort of impending sort of threat or indication of punishment if you do not comply. And so what you sort of get is something where people feel forced to engage in this. And really, like what Jesse and I discussed with that instance of being offered to join us in Short of Circle, is we felt that these were not people who wanted to sit down with us. These were not students that we felt like they didn't really want to know what they did to us or what they did to our community or what they did to our peers. We didn't feel like they cared, and there really is no evidence that they did care or that they do care. It's that they were sitting down because it was this, or they might be offered something they knew their parents would like less, like suspension or something on their record. And so sitting down with them feels like a way of just being in a different space for them to not take it seriously, for them to not offer change. And so what we really feel that we need to figure out now is how do we make these spaces and actually make it so people are joining? How do we get youth and everyone to understand that a restorative circle or restorative space must be predicated on the desire to have a community that is diverse? How do we make people understand the inherent value of caring for those in our community who have been harmed? And can we? And sort of, I think we all hope that we can and know that we must if we're going to have a community that's safe for all of us and a community in which we can all belong and engage. But what we need to figure out is how.
Questions?
Any other questions, either from the online folks or from the audience? Yes, please.
It's not a question, I just want to be an elder who...
Thank you. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
I just want to say something too. I think we just need to listen to the kids a bit more, starting with you.
Thank you. And for the Zoom folks, we just had someone stand up in the audience and say that we should listen to the children more, listen to our youth. And I think we would certainly agree. I know there was folks on Zoom who had questions. Was there anyone else or anyone in the audience?
I think there's some other folks in the audience.
Yes, please, raise your hand. There's...
Questions or comments?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question about curriculum. A couple of years back, we had this same conference with student speakers. There was a young lady who was telling us she had been invited to go to the English department and have a say in what books were being read at school. So I wonder if that's continued, or you feel that the administration is looking to include these voices in a classroom setting where there's supervision and people engage, as opposed to your clubs where you feel like people aren't engaging with you, and that's more of a space for you to feel safe. So I'm wondering about that. I don't have kids at the high school right now.
Thank you. Yes, to repeat that for the folks listening on Zoom, the question was about curriculum and asking that someone at a previous summit had mentioned being invited to the English department to discuss books and curriculum and how that works, and was asking if those discussions are continuing with administration and with the curriculum coordinators at the high school. So does anyone have anything to say about that?
So for 12th grade, there's a new English class called Brave New World, where we read and talk about things to make a world a better place. So one book that we recently read was There There, and it was about a voice about indigenous people, and it was a really good book. And then also my teacher talked about how the English teachers are getting around to find books that are portrayed really well and to kind of implement into a curriculum. And I also know that history teachers are kind of talking about adding more Asian American history into world US history curriculum in junior year. So yeah, there is definitely some change in curriculums.
And sort of, I can also add some thoughts on that. I think definitely I'm taking a junior, I'm taking US history this year, and we have an assignment that runs throughout the entire year in which each of us was able to choose a theme or a group of people, including various marginalized groups of people, and to track it throughout the year as we move chronologically through US history. So I'm personally tracking the experiences of indigenous peoples in the United States. There's other students who are tracking the experiences of Black people, of LGBTQ people, Asian people, immigrants more broadly, the disabled. And so I think that is something sort of just one microcosm of how we are having teachers on the individual level saying like, we are identifying this and we are working on it. I think in terms of books, I've had an experience in which I went to the curriculum coordinators and said like, we are reading Of Mice and Men, and this book felt really harmful to read for me, to sort of hear discussions in which people were comparing Lenny, who is characterized as an intellectually disabled man, and who in the conclusion of the book, I'm assuming everyone will be okay with the spoilers from this classic, is shot and killed by his close friend because he has accidentally killed someone, not understanding because he is sort of this very tall, very strong man and doesn't sort of understand what he did, and that he is then killed about it. And there were people who sort of said that this was a just and right thing because there was nothing else they could do, or it was his friend would do it or someone else would, or that you should be able, that it was right for someone who knew him to do it, and compared it to when another character regretted not putting down his own dog. And I think to be in a classroom in which I was reading this book and there were mannerisms of this person that I could see myself as someone with various sort of cognitive disabilities or differences, and sort of having students in the classroom compare this man to a dog and say this man's death was right. And I said, this is wrong, and I want to talk about it. And what happened was that my final research paper from my freshman year, which I wrote about the history of eugenics in the United States, which I wrote about the history of like harassment and oppression and institutionalization of disabled peoples, was shown to all the teachers, and they read it, and I got many compliments in the hallway, but the book is still being read. So I think what we are seeing is we have, I think like people have said, that V brought up earlier, is we have a culture of wanting to be accountable, of wanting to be progressive, of wanting to make these changes. What we really need to see is how are we showing it in our actions, not in our words.
We also have very amazing some teachers who also encourage this kind of conversation. So yeah, so we're working towards to it.
I will say, oh, question, yes.
Thank you very much for this. You guys are so real. I am just in awe. I had a question building up on the curriculum. Is there any type of class or talk or anything on diversity and unconscious bias training that everyone is supposed to get? I get some classes, people select their classes at clubs, of course, but I'm more interested in like everyone getting some sort of diversity training.
Just to repeat the question for anybody in the back or who's on Zoom, the question was, building off of the ideas we talked about curriculum, are there any required classes for the entire school that are standardized that discuss issues of diversity and equity? I'm going to pass it to Siobhan.
The answer is no. But we do have an elected class called Courageous Conversation on Race, and we threw on it. So we talk about, we do training there, and how to be anti-racist ourselves. So when we go out, we're able to change, like not change, but like promote this racial equity that we learn. So every ninth grader, we present a concept about race in a PowerPoint slide form. So that is like one way everyone in ninth graders have an introduction of race. But apart from that, there's not a mandatory curriculum or system that we have this conversation.
2 more questions from Zoom, and then I'll...
Yep, this is Ellen Feinshare. Just wondering how these groups might coalesce together if there is an anti-Semitic incident or an anti-trans legislation or needing disability advocacy or racist experiences that have happened so many times. In essence,
how have you been strong allies for each other so that many have experienced hate speech or hate crimes?
So the question was, how are these groups, some of which are represented here today, how do we coalesce together to be allies and co-conspirators in the face of incidents, and the person cited a few, like incidents of anti-Semitism or racism or transphobia, and how do we show solidarity to one another?
I'm sorry, but we have this union called SAFE, Students Advocating for Equity. So we're trying to figure out how we can utilize it the best, but the concept is that every wellness or equity leaders come and meet every month to have conversation on what we're doing and how we can support each other. So I think that's the part where we kind of join together to work towards our goal of equity. Do you guys have any other?
Yeah.
Okay.
An audience question?
Thank you so much for all of this. And I'm wondering if there are opportunities for you to speak to younger kids, in the middle school or the elementary school. I think selfishly as a parent of younger kids, you're the role models that I want my kids to be learning from. And I think hearing these messages from you are so much more meaningful than reading about them in a book or hearing them from other adults.
So to just reiterate the question was, are there opportunities in which leaders like those represented here might be able to speak to younger students at the middle or elementary level to give representation and to share their experiences and to build connection?
So there is not anything like that where we could go and educate others, but I think that there definitely should be, because just this morning my sister was asking me, what does it mean to be Black, or what does it mean? And she was asking as well as what race was she? Because our mother is Dominican and our father is Colombian. So it does make, I am white passing, but it does make her a little bit racial ambiguous, because she is like that in between where you could say like indigenous almost. And she was asking me, and I was like, well, you are not Black, but you're not white. And, being Black, it means when you have melanin inside of your skin, or when you are of darker skin color. And she was like, yeah, so am I white or am I Black? And I was like, I couldn't really answer her question in the way she wanted me to. And I felt like that should have been addressed, or something where she could have learned that in school, and others should also learn that as well.
So On Your Peace, which is like a club where we talk about mental well-being, they go to middle school every year to have conversation about mental illness and mental struggles, and how provide kind of guidance on how we can manage our peace. So kind of what you said, that is something that I think On Your Peace can work on, but towards more about identity part, so we can kind of allow children at young age to kind of navigate through their identity since young, so that when they go to high school they don't have to kind of struggle much with it. So that's something we can work on.
Did I just drop something? No, I did not. There was, when I was in elementary school, a program, I don't remember the name of it, where every other year an individual with some form of physical disability would come to the school and would speak to us. And we had one individual who in my second grade year was blind, and then there was another individual who was deaf. And I personally really liked that program because it was, showcasing individuals with disabilities and how they walk through their lives and how they interact with one another and with people who are able-bodied. But at the same time, those were the only instances where I ever saw representation of disabled people. And I also never, throughout my entire career, my entire tenure in Needham Public Schools, I have never seen an older individual on the autism spectrum, ever. I've never seen one represented. And, my entire life when I was in elementary through middle school, I thought that there was something horribly wrong with me and so did my peers, because they had never seen anyone who looked the way that I did and who acted the way that I did. And I remember in elementary school when we had those seminars about people who were physically disabled, I remembered there was a boy in my class who had a disability similar to my own, but it was more visible. And I remember kids my age making fun of him, and me thinking to myself, didn't we just talk about this? Why is this still happening? And my response to that when I was younger was, we need to talk about it more. And I think that is true. And I think that, you know, there are so many conversations to be had about what it means to be disabled. And I think particularly we need to include the voices of Black and Indigenous disabled people, because so many ableist legislations and ableist people in our government, yes, they do affect me as a disabled person who's white, but then they also affect individuals who are Black and Indigenous 2 times more than they will ever affect me.
I know we had a few more questions. We've just got a few more minutes, but if we have a couple more, I think we could take them briefly. Yes?
Feel free to take this as a rhetorical question or to answer it if you want. How do you guys have the time to put out all these fires of paper? Fantastic.
So, to just say this again, feel free to take this as a rhetorical question, that's the stipulation, but how do we have time to put out all of these fires? So I want to say how they manage their time, or do we want to take it rhetorically?
I literally just wake up, work, and then go back to sleep. But I also think it can be exhausting at times, but then it's also so rewarding that even to just see such minuscule changes, you can see, like, yeah, I literally worked like my booty off, but like can be like, I don't know, I'm just repeating what I said, but it can be really rewarding to see changes. And then I've had like people come up to me in the halls, like, especially other Latino people, just like, thank you for like doing what you're doing. It can definitely be scary at times, but I sometimes rather sacrifice my own well-being for the well-being of everyone around me.
The answer is that I don't. So basically, I, as a disabled person, am very tired all the time, but I still do it. And my way of, hopefully putting out a couple of fires of ableism in my community is just by being very no nonsense. I mean, it's not really my job to tell people around me, hey, when you made fun of me because I smiled weird, that made me feel really bad. And instead, my way of doing that is if someone's like, why are you fidgeting with your hands? I'm just like, why aren't you fidgeting with your hands? They're there for a reason.
Do we have one last question before we wrap it up? Okay. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. As one last bit of information before we depart for the wonderful breakout sessions, to all of you, if people are interested in following the work that you do, can they find your unions on Instagram? Can they find your written work anywhere? How can they reach you?
So you can find the Asian Student Union or your Peace and CCOR all on Instagram, or you can just send an email to our principal. Yeah.
I'm currently working on putting together a WordPress of my writing, especially the writing that I've done for the Hilltopper. Or not a WordPress, I don't know if that still exists, a blog. But at the moment, you can find me at a very goofy Instagram username at Sydney Cat B. My middle name is not Catherine. I don't know why it's Cat. But and there I will follow up with hopefully writings about what it means to be disabled in Needham and what it means to support disabled people.
Currently, the Latino Hispanic Student Union is still in the almost 2-month-long process now of being approved by the school board. So we are not allowed to have a social media yet because we are not a registered club, even though we have had meetings. But currently, if you would like to contact me or Yalis or Isabella, which is our other leader, if you go to the Needham High School Student News website, you can find a package there on the most recent airing that gives you all our contact information. Or you could also bombard Mr. Seacott with emails, and I mean that's what I've been doing. And then my Instagram is just vperez_05.
Yeah, V already said it, Mr. Seacott is still trying that, and my Instagram is A_Elise, and then I'm not a leader in BSU, I'm simply like a person, so you could email the president, one of the presidents, Leah Santiago, and
And if you're interested in reaching the Career Student Union, we are also on Instagram at QSU Needham High.
NHS. I don't know.
What they said. I don't know.
Just email us.
But we are on Instagram. If you look up Career Student Union or QSU, it will come up. And both Sid and I write for the Hilltoppers, so you can find us on the Hilltoppers website.
And we can also send out after this, if you have pre-registered or if you've just signed in with your email, we can send out some information about our student groups and where these things find us, because I'm assuming that many of these things might have just gone over all our heads. So we will be sending out links for folks to get involved if they are interested. And thank you so much for listening to our wonderful student panelists.
I want to thank the student panel. It's wonderful this year that we shook things up a little bit. We've usually had a variety of people representing our panel of various ages and groups and affiliations, and this time it was just students, so something new. I want to introduce myself. I'm Kim Marie Nichols. I'm also on the board, and you can see there's a donation jar. If you're interested in making a donation, I'll be walking around with a jar. We can give you a receipt if you like. You can also go on to the needhamdiversity.org website. You'll see a donate button. We also have here, we have, this is just a couple of the yard signs that we have that are outside in the lobby area. And you can take one home, take 4 home, there's 4 of them. We ask for a $10 donation, but that is not written in stone. We'd rather have people put the signs up and not have to worry about the money. And now we're going off to our breakout rooms. If you haven't signed up yet for a breakout, there's a white table in the lobby where the breakouts are. It also tells you what rooms they are. All the breakouts will be on the right as you leave the lobby. And we have one that's going to be just virtual. That's facing our history. But the other 5 breakouts are live. Food justice, critical race theory, supporting trans friends and family, white supremacy and parenting, and power through advocacy. So hope that you'll have a difficult choice, but we'll have a wonderful breakout to go to. Thank you very much. Afterwards, come back here. We have more programming after the breakouts. Thank you.
How long will the breakout be?
An hour. It will be an hour. From 3 to 4. Oh yes, and then after the discussion, after the breakouts, come back here for a short discussion. Then we're having sweets and treats outside at 4:30. Thank you.
Should I do? Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Come on in and have a seat. What's that? Do you think we're pretty much here? Okay, great. All right. So it's wonderful to see everybody here today. Thank you for coming out. And to those of you who are on Zoom, as always, being at these NDI summits is revelatory, I think, and filled with connection and goodness. So for the next almost half hour, 20 to 30 minutes, we are going to process some of what you've experienced here today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about belonging in Needham. And I want to start first, because it's fresh in your mind, by giving you all a chance to process together what you just took from your breakout group. And what I'm going to ask is that you find someone nearby-ish who you don't know that well, and you share with them something that stood out for you in your breakout group. Could be a question, something that resonated, or something you really learned. I am going to tell you 1 minute in to switch, and you're going to hear from them what stood out for them, and then we will come back to the main group. So, you have 30 seconds. Go find some people. Okay, if you haven't begun sharing, let the first person begin. Okay, let's switch. Okay, I'm sad to stop this, but come on back to your seats. So as we return, I bet all of us would love to hear a bit of what others were hearing and what's standing out to us as a group. So I'm wondering if anyone here would like to share something they learned from their partner or something their partner shared. Please.
So we've had a little group of 3, and sort of what it sounded like is that people felt it was really great to have small groups in breakout sessions and to have sort of lots of discussions with their community, and also felt that having really practical things come up about how can you do things, how can you make change, how can you improve on all these things you've been talking about was really beneficial for them. So I think that was sort of a common thread of the 3 of us.
Nice. So concrete potential actions and what we can do here in Needham. That's great. And small groups. Go ahead.
So I was partnered with somebody who went to the critical race theory discussion, and I thought it was really impactful to hear about how learning about what's being done at, like, in the educational system for children is like this really generational thread of like, now we know what people at a younger age are learning, so I can learn this too, so we're all moving along as a community. So that was really powerful sentiment.
Nice. Okay, and for anybody on Zoom who couldn't hear, this was the critical race theory discussion and the observation that it was really helpful to hear. Here's what's being done in the schools. How do we take that and hold that across generations? Okay. Yep, go ahead.
My name's Rachel, and a person I learned from spoke of a situation where children from the high school, not particularly Needham, but a high school, were in this store, and one of the employees came up and asked them, why are you dressed this way? And the kids felt, were taken aback, and they actually backed away because he was in their faces, and they were strong enough, thank goodness, that they pushed back and were very respectful and stated to this gentleman how that they, that they were a certain age, that they weren't adults, whatever, and I forget exactly what else, but they stood their ground and then they actually went somewhere and talked to someone else about the situation, and the person said, oh yeah, we know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And for that to actually for that something not to be done. And here, it's in Massachusetts, and
Right.
Massachusetts is supposed to be so aggressive and everything, so.
Right.
So we have a lot of work to do still.
Right. Okay. So an instance, a lived experience in the community of really disrespect and maybe even potential threat, where people were able to upstand for themselves and learn that this is something that happens here, even in a place where folks like us come together. There are liberal rules, etc. That's great. I have been focused on the front. Is there anybody from the back who wants to share? Go ahead, sir.
Way in the back here, there's 2 of us here. We're looking at critical race theory discussion, which Sharon was saying that she learned or reinforced her. CRT, being criticizing CRT is being lumped in together with criticizing the teaching of social, with criticizing the teaching of social learning. And if we're not teaching that in schools, then we're shot as a society.
Okay.
Just the idea of getting people to get along nicely with each other.
So learning that critical race theory and socio-emotional learning are often being critiqued together, and these are very separate things. And if we were to throw all of it out, we lose some fundamental skills in addition. Okay, I'm going to stop us there, although I know the processing has just begun, and it's something that we hope will carry on even past this event. Before we jump into the rest, I'm going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Nicole Argo. I am an NDI board member. I am a mother to 2 marvelous children. Where could they be? And I'm also a social psychologist by training, which is probably relevant for what we'll talk about in a second, belonging and justice. But before that, I would say that another hat I could not enjoy wearing more is as co-director of a new initiative in Needham. And I happen to see Beth Pinels in the house, so I'm going to invite her up. We want to let you know at the summit about this new initiative here in Needham that we hope will really contribute to these conversations. So by way of preface, I would just say the past years have been trying for everyone. I think it's fair to say, usually you can't make generalizations like that in life, but after COVID and with everything our world is going through, it feels fair, right? We have not just COVID and the losses and the stressors that attended that, but we have a recession, rising polarization and isolation, political tensions. So in response to that, leaders from across the Needham community came together and are working together to take on challenges that come our way as a team.
Okay, so the Needham Resilience Network, as many of you in this room actually already know, and some sit at that leadership table, is really not just the leadership table. It truly is supposed to be a network of networks. So while 30 people sit in a room each month to really work on relationship building and earning a sense of belonging, understanding one another's perspectives, listening for understanding, not listening to persuade someone of your perspective. While that's happening, each person at that table represents one or many groups of people in Needham. So every faith group, we hope, identity groups in Needham, of which there are many, and there are many Needham residents who wouldn't imagine that. But we have a wonderful variety of people from different backgrounds here. Business, clergy are there, healthcare is there, town government, civic organizations, and more. And so we sit at that table, not exactly as representatives, because we toyed with that word early on, because we are each ourselves and don't want to speak for someone else, but as liaisons. So information is just starting at this point in our 6th and 7th month to come from the network to groups in the community and then back to the network. And we're really trying to collect lived experiences so that we can understand what our priorities will be for going forward. It's most important for us today to make sure that everyone in this room and who's participating at NDI can feel they're a part of the network or have a connection to it in some way, have some tentacle reaching out to you and reaching back in. So if you can look at our website, which is just up and running, there's also, I think there was an article launched in the community paper this past Thursday, but we have a map on the website. It's nrnma.org. And if you look at, and you can also find that, I think, at the NDI website. If you look at that, you'll be able to see, like, oh, these are all groups. I belong to some of them. I belong to none of them. How can I get connected? You can also look at the website for our monthly newsletter, which is really detailed piece about the process that we're using to create a sense of belonging. So I'll stop at that.
Great. It's probably worthy of note that the network is perhaps the most diverse organization in town. So 86% of Needham is considered non-Hispanic white, and the network is about 50% non-Hispanic white. So it's just designed to make sure voices from all across the community are at the table to discuss whatever we're going through as a community. And then the only other things I would leave with you is the goals of the network are to highlight and align around shared local values. And we have a lot of them, right? Values like a strong community, promoting well-being, a culture of welcoming and inclusion and equity, things like that.
Raising our children
Came up a lot in the recent survey that NRN has put out, and we'll be reporting more on that in coming months. To grow genuine relationships, and this is what Beth was saying about while the network comes together as liaisons and somewhat representatives, like they're bringing stories from their groups, there really is individuals, and we know that there's power in coming to know each other as complicated, complex individuals. We want to anchor the town in the language of belonging, and then bring belonging by extension to all the various networks. It can be a household conversation in Needham. Belonging, all the ways that we belong. Where don't we? How do we fix that? To co-create a communications agreement, this is how are we going to talk to each other in difficult times? What are the rules we all abide by? We're in. We won't break them. If we break them, we call each other in, we continue. And to establish a protocol for rapid response to hate incidents, in addition to some prevention ideas.
And we should say here at NDI, this is a place where so many activists respond when something happens that hurts, harms, offends someone in the community. So we're trying to help as a network create some refined system so that we'll know together right away before something happens how we want to respond. Okay, I'm going to leave you to talk about belonging.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Beth. So you'll hear more about the NRN in months to come, hopefully, and please feel free to write to us from the website or find ways to get involved. Today, we probably only have 10 minutes left. I'm going to jump in. I want to just throw or suggest an idea out there, which is belonging as justice in Needham and everywhere. So I'm going to share some of the research that's happening at a national level, and then really hold a discussion for all of us will hold a discussion about what this might mean for Needham. So the title of this year's summit is Act for Justice Together. And when I say that feeling a sense of belonging as individuals and intentionally creating belonging for all as a community is one pathway to justice, I wonder if there aren't people in this room, and in this room particularly, who are like, what? No way, warm fuzzy feelings do not create change, right? Anybody thought that, maybe? Even a little bit? And it's true, for justice we need change, right? I would absolutely agree, especially if it's sustainable change. And for that, I hearken back to this concept of belonging, which comes from John Powell at UC Berkeley, the Othering and Belonging Institute. I want to suggest that the path to sustainable justice, the kind that lasts past a political term or legislation of a certain year, is tied to when we can feel the impact of our laws and systems, not just on ourselves, but on everyone else in our community. That is when my belonging is fundamentally tied up in your belonging, when we think of our futures as intertwined and reliant upon one another. That is when justice is secured. And it's not just secured for the moment when we have a majority in the House, right? I guess part of the reason that I put so much faith in belonging's ability to create change is because it's actually a radical concept. True belonging is a disruptor. So I've spent the last year studying belonging and surveying it across the nation, including in Needham through the Needham Resilience Network. And I wanted to share a few insights with you. So this is the first overarching thing that probably isn't news to anyone, right? Susie Wise has a book called Design for Belonging, and she says, belonging is the thing that unlocks the best in everyone. Kids who feel they belong learn better in school. Elders with a sense of belonging stay healthy and aware. Immigrants who belong thrive in their new communities. And having a sense of belonging leads to flourishing in every environment and group, big and small, from your home to the culture at large. So before I go to the next step, I would just love to hear in 30 seconds, when I say the word belonging, what word comes to your mind? You can shout it out.
Understanding.
Understanding, great.
Family.
Family.
Not being alone.
Compassion, not being alone.
Safety.
Safety.
Acceptance.
Acceptance.
Effort.
Effort, I love that. Trust.
Solitude.
Solitude. That's good.
Right place.
Included. Good. What was back there?
In the right place.
In the right place. A fit. You're in an environment that fits for you. Anything else? Okay, great. So you're going to see a lot of the attributes and adjectives that you just described on this slide. Especially, I think, on the left-hand side where it says connection, a lot of us very easily think of belonging as connection, right? The feeling of inclusion, being welcomed, being emotionally connected, having satisfying relationships. These are some of the items on a belonging battery that a team I work with has just created. Connection is really important, of course. Some folks will be familiar with the Surgeon General's focus on this. He has a book called Together. And the whole point is that feeling connected socially and emotionally leads to better health, better outcomes across the board. So it's gotten a lot of attention these days. So that's not that revolutionary. Why would I say it's revolutionary? Let's go to the next one, psychological safety. a lot of belonging has to do with the things that we don't talk about. And here in 2015, Google ran a massive study, the kind that only Google could afford or organize, right? They wanted to know, why are some of our teams really effective versus others? We try to distribute the most talented people throughout, we do this, we do that, but some are just high achieving and incredible and others are less so. So they looked at everything you could look at. Was it the number of top performers in the team, the collective intelligence of the people on the team? Was it that they all lived in the same space and worked together? It was none of those. Instead, it was something cultural, which we call psychological safety. Psychological safety is the feeling that you can speak up, you can dissent, you can throw something out that you haven't even thought about, right? You can make a mistake. And the people that you're with will still value you. They'll say, great, and they'll move on, right? They'll work with it because you belong more than just what you say in that moment. So team cultures like this throughout studies of time and space are more creative. They solve problems faster and they do it better. Does anybody think we might like something like that here? Right, it's not just good for Google, it's not just good for business, it's good for communities, right? All right, so if that's true, I would like us to think for just a second about Needham. So consider in your mind a thought experiment. Select board meetings, school committees, Facebook. When you think about Needham and psychological safety on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not at all and 10 is just perfect, where would you in your mind rate Needham? And I know we could all be thinking about different things with this rating, and that's okay. And what I would ask is, for anybody who would rate us at 8 to 10, what would make you say that? I think all the numbers on this scale are valid and legitimate. Does anybody have an 8 to 10 rating that they would like to explain? Go ahead, Maya. Why does Needham feel like a high score for you? What makes you feel belonging and psychological safety here? So Maya feels at home here. I think she feels safe when she walks through the streets. And probably when she says the things that are on her mind, people are accepting of them, right? So that's good. Is there anybody who rated Needham 5 to 7 for psychological safety? Okay, here's a few hands. So let's take 2. Maciel?
I've noticed that it depends who speaks, that may be heard more. Maybe others come to their defense more, especially on social media, than newcomers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm going to 6.
That's great. So it depends on who's speaking, and in particular with social media, more or less people will come to their defense if something is said. Great. Jessie?
So I rated it a 5, and personally I felt like that was consistent with my own experience and of the broader community's experience. I think for me personally, I feel like the tone's probably a 7. I think ultimately my racial identity as white is one of my most prominent identities, which means that at the end of the day, I'm not going to be profiled on the streets of Needham. I'm not going to be victimized by our law enforcement here because that's my permanent identity. But I often feel tokenized. I often feel like my ability to dissent is compromised by the way people perceive me and by how aggressive I'm going to seem if I state my opinion, or even my safety and integrity might be compromised if I disagree. So ultimately, I place it in their mid-range for myself, and probably a little bit less so for other people who hold more marginalized identities than myself.
That's great. And there was a lot in there. I'm not going to try to recap it all. But a lot about what is a dominant identity, and maybe being white in Needham feels a little more psychologically safe. And when other identities come out, it might not feel so safe. Is there anybody who rated between 1 and 4? Go ahead. Why did you choose that rating?
I mean, if I was answering for myself, I'm at 10. I mean, I can express myself, in many ways, but I know so many people that do not feel a sense of belonging and do not feel they can speak up and don't think their opinions are heard. Many who have even moved out of town because of it.
Right.
So my answer is for those people, not for myself.
Okay. And an awareness from the stories and lived experiences of others who have not felt it.
And lived experience is a great example of that project, which is an amazing project. And many of those people aren't comfortable speaking up about those experiences.
Right.
They gave them a voice, right?
So a shout out to the Lived Experiences Project in Needham, which has a website folks can look up if they want to hear some of the stories that you just referred to. All right, great. Let's move to the far right, co-creation. So this is a disruptive attribute as well. Here we mean that belonging would be a sense that you can create the future that you belong to, right? That would mean that you have access to it, that you feel able to participate, that you think your participation would be valued, that the system gives off cues that welcome and include you, that you know how the system works, that you feel like an insider within it, and that you perceive that you can have influence. This is not a small deal. Not today in our country, right? And perhaps not in our town in some ways, or in some ways it's very good. Again, I would ask you to think of Needham and go from the 1 to the 10. There are certainly folks here who might have an 8 to 10 experience. Why might Needham be an 8 to 10 experience on co-creation? Yes, Ramin?
I'm just saying we have only about 2 minutes.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. That's a good way to get my attention. Hold on, is there anybody else that would want to speak here? Actually, any number. All right, let's move on. I want to impart a couple of things. There's a national study that's being done, and it will be going public after Thanksgiving. But here are some reasons why belonging really matters. Lack of belonging is stressful. And I'm not going to walk you through all these graphs. All you need to know is that high belonging is the bar that best fits that. So stressful here, people with high belonging are in the blue bar, and their lives are less stressful, or at least we don't know what causes what, but that correlates. Lack of belonging is painful. People who have belonging have less pain on a daily basis. Lack of belonging is lonely. So people with high belonging are really low, and the lowest belonging chart here, which is in the yellow, off the charts, right? This is lacking companionship, feeling left out or isolated. Lack of belonging is less likely to stay at a job and recommend it to others. Lack of belonging is community distrust. Low belonging here are these really low trust scores for neighborhood, local residents, local government, and Americans generally. Lack of belonging is feeling left behind in today's world by technology advances and demographic change. It's feeling like a stranger in your own community. And scarily, lack of belonging is also lack of support for democracy. We find that across all the life settings, we looked at family and friends, the workplace, the nation, and local communities, and feelings of belonging in local communities are the least. 1 out of 4 people feels like they belong. Here's just a nugget for you to take away because it can improve all of our lives. In this nationally representative survey, and to my knowledge, it's the first time this was ever found, people who scored highest on friendship belonging had more diverse friends. You want to feel more belonging? Expand the diversity of your network. And then sadly, the other 2 graphs here are showing how many of us have 0 friends across difference. I'm not going to spend time here. You should just know that local belonging is associated with satisfaction, trust, social action, community engagement, feeling like you can make a difference, voting, less intergroup anxiety, the desire to get to know others across difference, openness to increasing local diversity, and more excitement for a changing future. The last thing I would say is that belonging doesn't happen by accident. We don't just luckily arrive in a place and feel a fit. Somebody has done something to make it that way. And in our community, that somebody can be us. So this is a quote by Christina Glennon at Levi Strauss. She says, belonging doesn't happen by accident. It's something that is engineered by each of us. In closing today, I would just challenge us all to engineer some more belonging in our lives in Needham this next year.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So I just want to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for joining us, whether you joined us in person or joined us on Zoom. We're just thrilled to have everyone here. We hope you leave with thoughts or thought-provoking ideas and ideas for how you can take action. And as Nicole and Beth mentioned, they took a big action. They started the NRN, the Needham Resiliency Network, and we're, NDI are proud sponsors of the, well, sponsors is the wrong word, home of the network. That's a big action people take. But I think one of the takeaways is that we can create belonging by just in our smaller everyday actions. And so I think everybody, if you could think about one action you can take when you leave here, we don't have time to share, but just think about it, that would be great. And to create belonging, we do have some cookies and coffee outside. And so you could take your masks off outside, and we figure there's still time before it gets dark, and by 5 it will be dark and we'll end. And thank you so much for joining us this year.